welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to travel back in history. This time we're going to the caves. I mean, literally, the Oregon caves, and how much farther back in history can we go? Meet the new director with me. Vicki, welcome to Journeys and Journals.
Thank you. It's great to be here today.
And who have you brought along?
I've brought along Sue Densmore, and Sue is the executive director for the Friends of the Oregon Caves and Chateau.
Oh, how interesting, because we all need friends, but what do friends do?
Well, to put it rather bluntly, Friends help with volunteer projects and with fundraising. So that's some of their two main roles that they have.
Well, why don't you start by telling us what you do at the Oregon Caves? I mean, you're dressed all up in National Park Service attire.
That's right. The National Monument, Oregon Caves National Monument, is a unit of the National Park Service. And as the National Park Service manager of the site, I look after the resources, be they natural resources like the cave or the forest, or cultural resources such as the National Historic Landmark Chateau.
You know, I was so surprised to meet the director when I got there this week to see the interview. You know, I'd been up before, but there wasn't a woman in charge. How does this happen?
Hopefully we can chalk that up to progress.
Okay.
I think in the last 5 years in this particular region of the National Park Service, about half of the new hires for the superintendent position or the park manager position have been women. Now, so I think we've just reached that point in our careers where we worked our way up into these roles.
Because your training is what?
My background is primarily in the biological sciences. I went to a forestry college when I left high school. So.
Oh, then is this when you want to tell me about your fantastic trees up there?
Well, we do have old growth forests up at the monument, sections that have never been logged, and we are particularly proud of the big tree. Perhaps not the most imaginative name in the world, but it covers exactly what it is. It's a Douglas fir, and as far as we can tell, in the state of Oregon, it's got the largest circumference of any Douglas fir.
And how big is the big tree? Big enough to...
It would take pretty much everybody in the studio to join hands to get around it.
Oh, and is that on a trail someplace I can go see?
It's on a trail right behind the chalet, which is where we have our visitor center. So the round trip walk is about 3 miles.
So when you say visitor center, you are interested in inviting us up to see the...
Oregon Caves is, you know, belongs to the American public, and it's kind of right smack in the middle of Southern Oregon's backyard. So I hope people in Southern Oregon think of it that way, as, you know, a place to come.
And people come from?
They come from all around the Pacific Northwest. They come from all around the world.
Now, why, Sue, why did you get involved in this?
Well, I think the really fun part about the Oregon Caves is if you grew up in Oregon, it was a part of our life. And I think over the last maybe 20 or 25 years, it's just been a little bit forgotten. It used to be the most visited site in Oregon. Over Shakespeare, Crater Lake, everybody. We were the place to come. And so the Friends, I think, the most fun part about my job is to just remind people, first of all, that this incredible site is up there. I mean, it's not going to be replaced. It exists. It has this beautiful landmark lodge on it. And so I think what our job is to just to get the word out and then to engage people in fundraising and support for the things that the Park Service doesn't pay for. Somebody said, why a Friends group? And it's because the Park Service can do a lot, but they need to show the local support, and local for us is the whole state of Oregon. Really, it's Cave Junction, Grants Pass, and beyond. That this is an important park, an important monument, and an important place to Oregon. It's one of the 3 great lodges in Oregon: Timberline, Timberline and Crater Lake have already been restored. It's time to do Oregon Caves. And so it's just, our job really is to just tell people about it and then to engage their volunteer activity as well as their finances in the projects that we have going on up there. So,
Vicki, why don't you tell us why the caves are important? Where did this whole story, I mean, as I understand it, it was a bear that led you to it. You want to spin that yarn? Is it true?
That's the documentation that we have. Mr. Elijah Davidson from the community over Williams in Applegate was with a larger hunting party, and he was somewhat away from the group, and he and his trusty dog Bruno were after deer hunting, but came upon a bear, and Bruno, being a good hunting dog, went chasing after the bear. The bear ran into the cave, Bruno ran into the cave, and Mr. Davidson wanted his hunting dog back, so he followed them in there, which, if we stop to think about it, is pretty incredible to follow a bear into a cave. And he was not prepared to go caving. You know, he had only
no
just a
flashlight,
no flashlight,
torch,
no carbide lamp, just a few matches in his pocket, and they didn't last very long. And he ended up being able to find his way out by following the water out. He could crawl on his hands and knees and hear the water and know that the water would be leaving the cave. And so that was how he was able to
you know what
navigate.
direction the water's going.
Right.
So you follow it out, and hopefully the hole's big enough for you to crawl
to get
through.
back out.
Right.
Over 100 years of discovery and adventure.
He would be the first adventurer, I would say.
Yeah, 1874 is when he went there.
1874. Mm-hmm.
So we're now well into the second 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, there's words that you know that few of us know. Spelunker.
Spelunking, yes.
Spelunking.
Spelunker would be the person who's going spelunking, I guess.
Why don't you tell us the real meaning of this?
Well, it refers to people who have as their avocation or their interest in exploring caves. And so these are the folks who typically are slightly more prepared than Mr. Davidson, who go in with a variety of ropes and at least 3 sources of light. And
3 sources of light, no?
At least 3.
No running out of matches.
No running out of matches. And they're typically the ones who do the exploration and the mapping. And a lot of national parks have cave resources, and a lot of times there's volunteer groups. The splunkers will form themselves into what they call grottos. And they will do a lot of volunteer work for cave parks, such as mapping, such as cleanup. We typically have a grotto that comes out and picks lint, little tweezers, little baggies, and all the visitors leave behind little tiny pieces of themselves, and they go through and pick it off the rocks and take it out.
Oh my, I know some have taken little things out of the caves that you weren't supposed to, called stalagmites and stalactites.
Right.
Which one is which?
Tight to the ceiling and mite coming up from the floor.
So these can be found, they're growing all the time?
They grow very slowly, but they are continuing to grow.
How do they grow? I mean,
it's the combination of the water coming through the rock. Marble and limestone is what you have up at Oregon Caves, and it precipitates out the calcite in that rock and then forms those features.
So it drips and drips and drips, and it ends up a puddle over here, which starts growing.
Mm-hmm.
You can see these.
There's lots of examples that you can see on the cave tour, and like you were saying before, initially when people were visiting the cave after Elijah had found it, they didn't really understand how long it took for those to form, and they thought they would grow back quite a bit quicker than they do, and so some people actually did take break them off and take them as souvenirs.
Folks, if you happen to be in a family that took them, would you please bring them back? It would be fun to see. You could probably match them up, but the others would have grown more since. It would be fun to see what they looked like 50, 80.
Probably because they were outside of the cave environment in terms of humidity and temperature. Some of them that were taken very earlier probably wouldn't have survived to come back.
Well, we have a story here because my friend Peggy Carpenter her mother was a Kincaid.
Mm-hmm.
The Kincaid man was on the same trip, and so but they weren't together. Elijah
Mm-hmm.
was over here. They were boys from Williams, and I guess it's not a big trip from Williams to hike.
That was the traditional way to come into the caves, as opposed to where the current highway comes up from Cave Junction. So
Because
the trail over from Williams.
That current highway was just a trail when Viola Craig walked up it with her boyfriend. That was a real fun thing for two couples to hike up to the caves.
Wow.
I just drove up there and I couldn't imagine.
What it would be like to walk.
Hike
or,
20 miles,
hike
yeah.
20 miles.
Is that how far it is from where?
From Cave Junction, it's
Yes.
about
18 to
20 miles.
Yeah, 20.
Yep.
Well, now Cave Junction is a new town.
Compared to Grants Pass.
It's
for
new
sure.
because the road went in.
That's my understanding, yeah.
Now, why the caveman? Why? I mean, we've moved from, you know.
I'll jump in a little bit on that. My understanding is that all started on a dare, and it was a bunch of Grants Pass businessmen who, the Oregon Caves had existed, but their idea was, how can we kind of take it and promote Josephine County? And so that's how it started, is my understanding. And it was dentists and doctors and bankers and really top business people in Grants Pass. And it's really separate from the National Monument or from the Oregon Caves. It was an organization unto itself that did this promotion, kind of using the caves as an idea. So that's Debs Potts, who was a longtime Love state senator from Grants Pass, and of course a former mayor, was a caveman, and many, many, many fun stories. They used to go around, in my childhood, I was raised in Lakeview, and they would come in many parades. They traveled to most of the fairs in the summer, and they'd come along with a little kind of a rickety cart, and if you had a ponytail, which I did, they'd grab your ponytail and they'd put you in the cart and take you away. And some people can still remember the fear of where were they going to be going, because they were dressed in their skins and their false teeth, and they were quite a group. So, but a lot of fun. It was all just great fun. I think that was the point of the cavemen, as I remember them, as they were just a whole heck of a lot of fun.
But the domain of the caveman is what you're talking about, isn't it?
That's the title of our historic overview of the monument. And I think the interesting point from some of the research in the book was that there was quite a trend for booster clubs all around the country during that era, but this is the only one that we seem to know of that was dedicated toward public lands, toward a Park Service unit.
These were a bunch of fun people. I'm going to take you after this to meet Irva Dayton, because Fred was one of those cavemen. Of course, my dad, Bob Martin, was a caveman. He was called Snap Glasses, so that's how I happen to have dozens of pictures. I'm going to give them to you because they don't really belong in my attic.
Well,
Do you like?
It's really exciting to have that part of the monument's history, to be able, and because we'll be able to share it with all of the visitors.
Well, now you tie into the San Francisco to Grants Pass history. They were trying to promote inland. Is that the right term?
Well, it's the let's see, what is it? It's I'm not going to think of it as we're sitting here on the TV, but it has
I've heard
another
the
name.
Inland Empire and the Mystic Corridor.
Mystic Corridor, that's
another,
the one I can remember that hooked all the way through the Redwoods up, and I think that ended at Crater Lake, I think was the idea. It came from San Francisco all the way to Crater Lake through the coastal highway by the Oregon Caves.
101 to 199.
There you go.
I know that the race that was run by the Indian men went to Grants Pass and stopped there, and they ran from San Francisco. And you had to be Indian to run in it. And, you know, that's an archival, it's a marvelous bit of history, but why was it prejudiced against anybody else?
Probably because there were a lot of Indian tribes and Indian influence throughout. The Takelma Indians were at the Oregon Caves area long before, you know, it was found, you might say, by Elijah. So I think there's probably a lot of influence. That,
Tell me more.
You know, I wish I knew more about it. We're just starting to, we have some pictures, some historic photographs of the many Indian tribes that were in the region long before it was founded by the Oregon Caves Company. So, and I don't know all the different tribes, but I know that there were quite a few.
Shasta's another one.
And the great influence of Indian up there in that whole area. And I'd be happy to get you the pictures. We have lots of different examples of the different tribes. So.
Oh, that's, you know, things I don't know anything about. But how was it that they decided to build? You brought gorgeous pictures here of, it's called Oregon Caves Resort. Now, do you still use that title, or?
Well,
I only hear chateau.
Yeah. It was actually kind of the fun story that Sam Baker, who was chair of U.S. Bank in Grants Pass, and a group of investors actually started the tours, and then in 1931 they decided they wanted to have what they call it, indoor plumbing and a more luxurious opportunity for these many travelers that had been coming on horseback and all different ways. They had cabins and tents, but they wanted to create a more you know, sophisticated lodging. And so then Gus Liam, who happened to be Sam Baker's brother-in-law, was asked to design the chateau. And one of the issues, there wasn't really any space to put such a building. So it's a 10-sided, 6-story building built down in a canyon, which is highly unusual and is now still regarded as one of the top examples of rustic architecture in the National Park Service. So, but it was all built, the interesting thing at this point, it was built by private money, private enterprise, and in the Depression. And here we are back in the same time again, and we're restoring it because it's just as important now as it was then, and they were able to build it and have it be very successful during that time.
Well, I love caves history, but this, how did they get there? How did they have the courage to, I mean, have you studied all that? And why to build something so grand and beautiful?
Well, I think they were seeing how successful lodges had become at other national park sites, such as the Ahwahnee down in Yosemite, or Crater Lake Lodge, or some of the
Mount Hood has its own beauty
at Glacier. And so it was an idea that they felt on perhaps a smaller scale, but that could be replicated and be successful at Oregon Caves.
Now, how many stories high is this lodge?
It's 6.
6 stories, and I know a little something about the lower level. You want to just discuss what happens when water comes through it?
Well, it's kind of a very thoughtful way that Mr. Liam mirrors what's happening underground, above ground, where the river Styx comes out of the cave through 2 little ponds and waterfalls, and then flows through a conduit through the dining room, and then returns back down the canyon. And one of the things I just read recently was he came up with that idea quite a few years before Frank Lloyd Wright came up with it when he was designing Falling Waters back in the Midwest.
Oh, I love to hear that story. Yes, Falling Waters is really renowned.
Another architectural icon, yeah.
Well, now this picture that you've brought predates. I mean, look at that tent there. Why? We're talking early days.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they did refer to it, that has Oregon Caves Resort, because they did, like we said, they had tents, and you could, this says what, showing the entrance Yeah, at the caves. So it was, they used to go out in their cars, travel up and down the coast and promote it as a resort. And the billboards, there was an awful lot of promotional activity with the Oregon Caves Company because
Now,
they were a private concessionaire.
You're talking before the chateau's built, before
Absolutely.
probably the road was.
The road went in 22.
Sam Baker's daughter, we have some pictures here, but Sam and his wife,
This is Sam.
Sam and Sophia, and then Connie, that's in the picture down below, was their daughter. She was 3 when she used to come up by horseback with her father. And then she was the first person to be married in the chateau at 21. And she married, her husband was very active at Timberline Lodge, so they have a long history. But she and her husband used to be hired for the summer to drive in their car to every restaurant and every hotel, all the way up and down the Oregon coast and all the way up and down probably Highway 99 at that point, to put out flyers about the Oregon Caves. And that was their summer job. Year after year, they went out to do that. So that was part of that, plus the caveman. There were a lot of reasons that it was very successful.
Because Cave Junction was not until the junction to the caves happened.
Well, and the other interesting thing, we talk about the state of Oregon, and the road that goes up from Cave Junction up to the Oregon Caves is the only state highway that dead ends. I mean, it dead ends at the Oregon Caves, and now, of course, you know it's been paved. And so that shows you the importance it has, I think, to the whole state of Oregon, that they would bother to improve it and to pave it.
Well, now, there's a special story about your road. Why didn't they clear cut along the edge like most highways? What is beside your highway?
Well, I think I think it was designed somewhat like the chateau was designed, to fit into the topography, to be a park-like road, to not be an interstate, a superhighway, and they blended it in with the Creek Canyon as you go on up. And it really, the alignment really hasn't changed since it was designed and built in the 20s.
I'm told the credit for that goes to Gus Lim, who was not an architect, or he's not.
He had architectural training. We have now met a variety of his relatives, and they said that he was a builder, but he also did apparently have quite a bit of training. I might not say that he was a certified architect, but he had a lot of training, and he did, of course, build 50 homes in Grants Pass as well as the U.S. Bank facility. So he certainly had a lot of training and a lot of excellent buildings that they had a hard time tearing down if they wanted to.
Oh, you've brought
such
some
a nice
pictures.
job.
That U.S. Bank is absolutely, the people lost their shirt when they tore it down because it resisted it. My aunt's, Dr. Coverstone and Dr. Mosier's office was upstairs.
Oh.
So I know that building really well, and I hated to see it demolished.
Oh, yes.
And in retrospect, of course, it wouldn't happen.
Right.
You've brought, this is about Gus's passing, and he's called Oregon Builder. Please share about why you commit your time and energy to a hole in the ground. I mean, what else is it?
A special hole in the ground.
Oh, like no other.
Well, I think one of the, we talked a bit earlier about how there are other national park units with cave resources, but one of the unique things for Oregon Caves is the amount of prehistoric fossils that have been found in there, including black bears, grizzly bears, jaguars. It's one of the most abundant collections of fossils that's ever been discovered in a cave. And there's also what we call cave critters, endemics, or little insects or arthropods that aren't found anyplace else in the world. They only live at Oregon Caves.
Well, I think it's 100, the monument itself is also one of the first that President Taft designated as a national monument. I think if you've been watching all the OPB stories, a monument is designated by the president. So this is pretty important that it got the attention of the president, and he designated it in 1909 as a national monument. So it's pretty special as far as just even that, to say that we have one of the oldest monuments in Oregon.
You have a bookmark in here. What are you telling me?
Oh, well, a couple of stories there. One of the interesting things that occurred at the chateau over dinner in the 30s was the meeting of Mr. Graves and Mr. Gruber, one who had a photography publishing company, one who was very interested in photography, and over dinner they came up with the idea for the Viewmaster.
Oh, that's where this comes in. Ta-da! Click. Oh my, how I love these things.
Yeah, so the idea came about at dinner at the chateau after they'd spent the day hiking and going on a cave tour.
That, oh, we can stereo view a picture of the caves. These are just wonderful relics. It's like brand new, right out of the box.
Yeah, and well, you know, and it's had a few iterations over the years, but I believe Play School has the rights to it right now, and they make them. We can all get them for our kids and our grandkids still today.
I do.
And we're hoping to. Somebody redesigned it. Vicki can talk a little more about it, but the person that actually redesigned it in the 50s has won a big award, and we're going to try to have him out as a guest in September.
Please invite me along. I
course,
love it.
Of course. Yes.
The Oregon Caves. This is available, now it's a national monument, which makes a whole lot of sense. And we invite everyone.
Absolutely.
Come and see if you want to spend the weekend, or if you want to stay overnight, or if you just want to walk through the caves.
Or have a milkshake. Best milkshakes around.
Oh, yes. That counter looks like it did 50 years ago.
You have to treat yourself after all that exercise.
Thank you, women, for coming here and sharing your stories. And there's so much more I want to talk about. So let's come back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I love history. And the Oregon Caves has me spellbound. It's a wonderful thing to go on a trip with your visitors from out of town.